Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good As Gold Australia. Today, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good As Gold.
Thank you, Darryl.
Brian, and today we interview David Morgan from the Morgan Report, an advisor to As Good As Gold Australia. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Good morning, David.
David, the world's economy remains in a mess. I was warned about this, however, as was Brian, a long time ago, early 1980. So none of which is happening at the moment surprises us at all. And what I'd like to do is just share with you, if I could, the event that took place between myself and Peter Daniels in his office at that time. I remember walking in the office, and we've got to keep in mind here that Peter was one of the biggest entities in real estate in Australia. He had offices all around Australia and in Singapore, remarkably successful man. I went in to speak to him about speaking at an event that I was conducting, and he said yes, as a matter of interest, so that was great. And so as well as being a very successful businessman, this particular gentleman, Peter Daniels, was recognised as a global speaker. In fact, I remember Dr. Norman Vincent Peale referred to Peter as the best platform speaker in the world at the time. Remarkable. And so Peter, of course, has written 13 books in the meantime on personal development, so he was a mountain of a man. I remember sitting in his office, Brian, on that first occasion, and he asked me a question that I had no answer for.
No.
Yes. And when you're sitting in front of a billionaire, that is a little confronting. The question he asked me was, Darryl, before we get to know one another better, I'd like to ask you this. Do you know the difference between currency and money? And I said, Peter, I think they're both the same. He said, Darryl, that's the wrong answer. Now, at that, he pulled out an American dollar and he waved it in front of me. And he said, Darryl, this is currency. And this has lost approximately 90% of its value since 1971. So he said, Darryl, currency loses value over a lengthy period of time. He then put his hand in his other pocket and withdrew a silver coin. And he said, Darryl, this is money. He said, this has gained value at around 3,000%. It's a 3,000% increase in value against this currency in the same period of time. Now, I have one more question for you, Darryl. I said, what's that? And he said, well, knowing that this loses value and that gains value over a long period of time, what would you save in? And I stumbled my way through it at the time. I didn't want to get the second answer wrong. And I said, money. He said, good answer, Darryl. So it was a valuable lesson that I learnt that day. So he said, Darryl, the process of debasing global currencies will continue. He said they'll continue until they go to zero. And he said that would be the end game. Now, gold, he said, would always highlight the complete inadequacies of governments and confirm the debasement process. The way I read into this at the moment, David, is that gold has been on an upward trend since 2000. It's had a pause, and now it's breaking up again. A couple of points of real interest. In 2011, gold hit $1,920 US. That's its all-time high in US dollars. Hasn't returned to that yet, getting fairly close again. But virtually all other currencies in the world, we're seeing all new highs. So if you have a look at the Australian currency, of course, 1,800 now, 1,800 in 2011. We're looking at 2,500 today.
Yep.
So it's well surpassed its previous high. Looking at the world at the moment, we've got COVID. And this is where Peter was right. He didn't know that COVID would exist. but he knew there would be all sorts of issues ahead. And he knew that because the currencies have been debased that heavily, that these would all be black swan events in real terms. So now we have COVID. European countries like Austria and Germany are now starting to go into lockdown again. So the whole process starts all over again. So I believe right now, David, we're in for a massive rally in gold and silver. I just want to have a quick look before I have my first question for you. A quick look at gold and silver over the last 20 years. I think it's important because this will give us an indication of what we can expect over the next 20 years, right? So let's have a look at the year 2000. Gold in Aussie dollars was $440. It's 2,500 today. So it's up 570%. 570% over a 20-year period. So in US dollars, same period of time, gold was 282 in the year 2000, and now we're sitting at 1,806. So it's done a little better than Aussie. It's up 650%. Silver hasn't fared quite as well, but silver's up 420% over that period of time. In Aussie dollars, US, fared a little better again, 465% in US. Now, so gold and silver have done remarkably well. Keeping all of this in mind, David, my question is this. Do you believe that the economy now is in a better or worse state than it has been over the last 20 years? I'd like your answer on that. And if so, why? And then do you believe that gold will outperform its previous 20-year performance? If you could answer both those questions, really appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing that story. That's remarkable. I have a similar story as far as what really, really piqued my interest in the metals. But first of all, I want to be very clear because words have meaning, and let's, be strict on our definition. When Darryl asked me about the economy, I'm speaking about the physical economy. I'm talking about what makes the world go round. I'm talking about growing stuff to eat, animal husbandry, if you eat meat. I'm talking about trade of hard goods, like any commodity you can name, the softs like cocoa and cotton, to the hards like the metals, base metals and all that. So the economy is the physical exchange between people to make our lives better. So if you say, David, is the economy better or worse than it was 20 years ago? I'm excluding the financial markets. I'm just talking about the economy. So that is an easy question for everybody to answer. And it's a personal question, but he asked me on the aggregate. He means on a world basis or on a US basis, that type of thing. So the answer is no, it's not as good. And the reason is your personal economic reality better or not? And the answer is no, for most people. Now, there's the billionaire class, which we can exclude. For them, yes. And then there are subsets, like there could be a couple that are now 40, that 20 years ago, they got married in their 20s, and now they have a house, and they have got, 2 cars, and they've got a couple kids in school. And, from the aspect of their personal situation, when they were broke out of college and now they both have jobs, they would have to say our economic position's actually better. And now we'd have to kind of examine that a little bit and say, well, now we have to kind of bring in the finance side and say, well, you had no debt out of college. You had no worries. Now you're both working like crazy and looking for that overtime because you have so much of a debt load, even though you have somewhat secure jobs, but your lifestyle exceeds your ability to service the debt. And that's basically the whole crux of the issue. So on top of that, and this is obvious, but I'll say it anyway, and I'll move on to the second part. Economically, we're in a contraction due to several reasons. It's really, in my view, studied view, the implementation of a new economic system. And there's sort of this situation with the illness that kind of supersedes everything else. But we know for a fact that we're getting a breakdown in food, we're getting a breakdown in the supply chain, we're getting a breakdown in unloading, offloading the cargo containers and ports off of LA and other places. We're seeing all kinds of issues between labor unions. We're getting situations where, based on the illness, if you will or if you won't, if you do or if you don't, it holds up things. So you're getting a very big congestion throughout the entire global economic supply system. So obviously that impacts everybody, rich and poor alike. Now, the second half of the question, Darryl, you have to bring me back, had to do with, do I think gold will outperform in the next 20 years? And the answer is yes. And the reason is twofold. One is gold has actually performed, I think Darryl said very well. I'll say well. I mean, I'm not going to, groan about semantics. What most people don't like about gold is that when they buy it, it doesn't go up for 5 years. And that's been the case. I mean, gold in US terms has not done a whole lot over the last few years, or several. Silver, even worse. I mean, silver was hanging around the $18, $20 level for about 8 years. And then after March of 2020, and it hit this $12 level, that was a record as far as the gold silver ratio goes of about 125 to 1, 125 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold, when the natural ratio in the ground right now is about 8 to 1. You can only mine about 8 ounces of silver for 1 ounce of gold globally. Anyway, that quickly, within a year, took itself in half. In other words, it went from 125 to about 62. So you would have doubled your fiat had you put your money in gold and silver at the same time. Silver outperformed basically twice as well in that time, 1 year. But I think the more important point is long-term, as Darryl's pointed out, 20 years. So 20 years out, yes. Why? As your friend said, all fiats end in failure. It's heading towards zero. Will it hit absolute zero before we institute a new financial system based on central bank digital currencies? The answer is probably not. I mean, it's most likely that we are seeing the restructuring of the global financial system as we speak. And how quickly it'll be implemented and what problems there will be seen by everyone remains to be determined. But we will see gold perform what it's always done for 5,000 years. So going out another 20 years is a pretty safe indication, or pretty safe for me to say that I'll play catch up. Catch up means that all the distortions that we've seen in the financial system and how degraded the economy has become because it can't really trust the financial system will manifest in something that's been trusted globally. Doesn't matter your nationality, doesn't matter your nation state, your religious convictions, it doesn't matter political affiliation, doesn't matter what language you speak. Gold is universal, and gold speaks to everyone. And because of that, there'll be a run to gold, because as governments continue to degrade and they start further totalitarian measures against the people, more and more people will seek security, and that's outside of government. So when you held up that currency, the one thing you didn't say, or maybe I missed, is that this has got the full power and force behind it. And government is force. And I don't care if it's the Australian government, the US government, the Zimbabwe government, or the Canadian government. All governments are force. They all force you to participate in the system that has been created by the elite banking class, which in almost all cases are outside of government itself. So government is all powerful. You might say that they are the muscle, and I'm using the mafia metaphor, a gangster metaphor. They're the muscle that collects the money from the people when they need to pay up. But the people behind the muscle are really the banking elites that, again, are usually a step away from governments. They loan their private script to governments at interest, and we, the people, are on on the hook to pay it back. Whereas in an honest monetary system, when you're actually trading in the coin realm, silver and gold, or certificates thereof, what you're doing is you're leveling the playing field where it's the same rules, laws, and availability for everybody. And you have very, very different moral structure when you have an honest monetary system versus a corrupt, contrived one that requires force, especially at the end, for it to continue. So gold will do what I've said so many times, and I'm almost done, Darryl and Brian. I've said many times that you'll see 90% of the move come in the last 10% of the time.
Mm.
Because unfortunately, I've said this on your interview last time, I believe, that it will be not only worrying about the future of money, it will be fear-driven, in my view, because the fear that the dollar is going to zero, the Aussie dollar is going to zero, I have to be forced into this central bank digital currency, and I don't want all of my money, all of my hard-earned savings. So I've got an out. I've got one place I can go, maybe two. You might go into some privateer type cryptos, but the one place that's been there for thousands of years is money, not currency. So you stay away from the central bank digital currency to some extent by going into money that's been trusted from biblical times on. So yeah, it's going to zoom. I think at the end, when the fear takes over and all these people that were sitting on the sidelines but are somewhat aware of what's taking place, have to have gold at any price. And then the institutions that their bonds no longer sell, no one will take them. There's no one to back them up. They're going to be looking for any liquidity they have. Their balance sheet, they only have 1% cash, and that cash is looking for gold. I mean, it's going to be, in my view, a run to gold like you've never seen before, because we've never had a global financial collapse before. And that's what we're going to see.
Very valid comments. And
Absolutely.
Once again, I mean, we've always said gold is not get rich quick. You can, in that last phase, you could get rich quick with gold, but it's not the reason you buy gold. I've always said it's get rich slow, David. It's proven to be that. Just quickly, I've given an illustration, as you know, Brian, for a number of years now with reference to gold versus real estate. And I just want to share some thoughts with our viewers here again. Let's remember, gold's up 570% over 20 years. That's something that's around 27% per year. So my illustration is pretty simple. If you had $500,000 invested in gold and you let it sit there for 5 years, based on a growth rate of 20% a year, you would be looking at $1 million in your account.
True.
Same amount of gold, but it'd just be worth more, so you'd have $1 million sitting there. If you, at that point, decided in retirement, say, for example, to liquidate at the rate of 20% per annum, which would be $200,000 a year, you would have the same amount left in your account at the end of the year. You'd have less gold, but it'd be worth more, so you'd have the same amount, same value in your account at the end of the year as you had at the beginning. If you took it to the next stage and we looked at the real numbers at 27%, and you only withdrew 20, you'd have more in your account at the end of each year than you had previously. So you could do this infinitum. What a wonderful retirement package. You know, and I compare this, David, to say, well, let's look at the real estate. If you had a $500,000 property, and let's say that it increased in value to 20% a year, which would be a rarity over 5 years in succession.
I haven't seen it yet.
You'd have $1 million property. Now, if you rented that property out as an investment, return on that before outgoings would be around $40,000 a year. After outgoings, around $30,000. I've confirmed this with numerous experts within the real estate industry, and they agree with me 100%. So it's $200,000 versus $30,000 return. There is no comparison between the two. Now, what made this more interesting was an experience that Brian had the other day when he came across a lottery. I want Brian wants to share this with you because it's very powerful and substantiates what I've been talking about all the time.
Yeah. So about a week ago, I received a lottery or prize home lottery through the mail. So I quickly looked at it because the front cover was excellent, and I'll show you that right now. But this was a combination, a $10 million lottery, Australia's biggest ever prize lottery. And inclusive in that lottery is an apartment complex, 5 apartments to the value of $8.4 million, plus, this is a good one, plus $1.3 million in gold. I think I keep the gold, throw away the apartments, but that's it. A Land Rover of $176,000 and a caravan for $108,000. But let's concentrate on the 5 apartment building complex, $8.4 million. So they give the figures of the rental of what the person who wins this lottery, what they could collect on an annual basis. So it starts off at rent received, $405,000 per year. Then the costs come in. And look, I will say before I go further, I don't knock real estate. In fact, I think it's Currency Wars of Jim Rickards, he says he was sitting down with a family in Italy that had a wealthy from the 12th century. And he basically says 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 real estate, 1/3 fine art, and 1/3 precious metals, gold and silver. Getting back to this. Rent received, $405,000 per year, minus the fees. So they included the rates, water, body corporate fees paid, and so forth and so forth. Those fees come to $81,000 per year. Then I took the initiative and said, well, obviously I don't want to come and collect the rent from the individual owners if I've rented these apartments out. I don't want to come and collect the rent on a monthly basis. Give that to the real estate agent. Well, they will charge, I think, around close to 2.5%, right? So that's another $10,000 odd that you take off your fees. So the fees come to $92,000 thereabouts. So what you actually do get is $313,000 a year in rent. Now, that's, if you like your real estate, that's reasonable, having a rental income of $313,000. But of course, Darryl and I have been buying gold and silver for a fair while, over 20 years. All right. Now, that $313,000 on an $8.4 million complex is 3.7% annual return. 3.7. I'm not quite sure whether I like 3.7, but I don't like it, but mainly because my gold return is far better. And Darryl was just giving some figures, but at 20%, and I go to goldprice.org. It's a good website, right? And you can see how gold has risen from 20 years ago to right to now, and it's a roughly 20% per year for the last exact day, 20%. So we are talking about using that 20% on your gold. If your 8.4 million was not a 5-bedroom apartment, 5-apartment complex, but in 8.4 million of gold, the return would be $1.68 million per year. So as against 3.7%, 20%, I think I take the 20% in gold. And I do hear the explanation, well, gold doesn't give you a yield. Gold doesn't have to give you a yield when it's going up at this rate, So the features here is that 1/3 fine art, 1/3 precious metals, 1/3 land. Oh, I like that idea, but most people are 100% land, no gold, no fine art, and I think they're making a very large mistake. What say you there, David?
I totally agree. I think your numbers are accurate. I think real estate's overdone. And of course, there's exceptions everywhere. And there are people that are 100% real estate that really know what they're doing and doing quite well and probably beat, what you've talked about. I do want to step back a little bit and talk about what Darryl has brought to everyone's attention, and you too, Brian, just now on, what kind of returns you get in gold. First of all, one point is stocks, a lot of stock investors. And what's interesting about the most popular go momentum stocks is almost all of them pay no dividends. But you never hear them, I'm not buying stock to pay dividends. But you're not going to buy gold because it doesn't pay a dividend, right? But it's okay in the stock market. But they're both investments, So that's one kind of a little pet peeve. I just want to throw that one out there. But on the compounding of gold, I mean, you're right on your interest rate if you use simple interest. I'm a finance major, not that it makes me different than you guys. You might have a finance degree, doesn't matter. But if you go to the CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, which is compounding. So compounding is when you have $100, it goes up 10%, you have 110. Now, if you go to compound that at 10%, you've got to take that 110 and take 10% of that, which makes it 121. And then if you're going to compound that, now you're going to have to get 12. So gold has had a compounded annual growth rate, which is different than simple interest. And you don't have to be a finance major to understand this, of over 10% a year for those 20 years that we keep referring to. Silver, not as well. It's been about 9%. So I do a little bit differently because, and this is not to argue, but it's a discussion. And the way I approach it is basically the same idea, but it accounts for the price changes in the gold, the paper price. I mean, look, you got 10 ounces of gold now and 10 ounces of gold 100 years from now, you've got 10 ounces of gold. So why would you hold on to it? Well, because of the destruction of the currency. That's why. And governments coming, a lot of reasons. But what I have taught, and I think is very close to what you have talked about, is I say, you got your pile of metal, or maybe a small pile, at your retirement, and I say sell 10% every year, okay? So this is a personal choice. If you've got several $1 million in metal, maybe you sell 1% a year. So it kind of varies. But let's just say, for talking purposes, you've got $1 million in metal, okay? And now you sell 10% a year. So gold's at whatever price it is. You sell 10% of it, you take that in fiat, you put it in your bank account, and you live off it for a year. Now, the next year, you need to live. Maybe you haven't spent all the money, but you're just going to sell your 10% in gold. Now, the next year that you sell it, you have less gold to sell, but the price might have gone up by 20%. So now you sell that 10%, you take that fiat, you stick it in your bank, and you live off that in your retirement the next year. And then the next year rolls around and you sell 10%. So if you always sell 10% of what you have remaining, you'll never sell it all.
No,
you really won't. You may get your pile down substantially. But if you do it over time, as I'm outlining, you could sell it, as Darryl indicated, for probably 20 years. So if you retired at 60, you've got a life savings that's still going to be there when you're 80. Or if you're lucky enough to live to 90 or even 100, you're still going to have it. Now, over that time frame, it will even out. They'll have some years where you will do very well fiat-wise, and there'll be other years that maybe you won't do as well. But you'll always have it, and it's solid money. And I have to interject, I don't expect that to be a viable illustration for probably until for the next few years. It will be, but I do believe we're going into a new monetary system. So I just want to give you the idea. It's basically the same thing that you outlined, just a little bit of a different approach. It does account for, the paper price of gold fluctuates, sure. But you've got a solid asset, real money. It's really not an insurance policy. I mean, a lot of people call it that. As you illustrated, there's currency and there's money. If you want money, you can relax. Yeah, it changes. But the money doesn't change, really. I mean, I keep trying to pound this into people's thinking process, because you've got X amount of gold or silver. That's a fixed amount. And then you sell it as required, as you wish, or whatever. And the only thing that changes is the amount of money printing that's gone up against it, and what kind of rhetoric the politicians and the banks are spewing from their mouths that changes the price. But the price is not changing the amount of metal you have. So, if you really think it through, if you start off with 100 ounces of gold and then you over a year buy another 100 ounces of gold and you've doubled your position and the gold price falls in half, you might feel horrible. However, you have doubled your gold position. The amount of gold that you have is twice as much as you started with.
Yes.
And that's really the way to think, because but most people can't. Believe me, the banksters are experts at making sure that you think in paper terms, not in gold terms. So that's what I have to say. I think it's a pretty good way to think about it. So I plan to do. I mean, I'm, ready to call it quits here in another couple of years. I said, in London about 2 years ago, how long will this system stay before it absolutely implodes? I said 5 years at the most. And the guy almost fell off his seat because he trusts me. And he knows I study hard and I've got a pretty good, vision into the future. Don't have a perfect crystal ball, but, I've studied monetary history. I know how these things collapse. And once they start down, they don't come back easily. And you can huff and puff and blow the wind all you want. It's not going to change the catastrophe that's already started. Just look around, look at the shipping, look at the food supply, look at the political unrest, look at the lockdowns, look at everything. It's here, folks. I mean, most people that will tune in as good as Go Australia will obviously know it. And they're trying to pick up that nugget or two that's going to help them not only financially, which you already know the answer, but also what else can be done in these very, very trying times.
Well, I agree with you, David. I've always thought that gold and silver is money. And I like Jim Ricard's experience of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, because the 1/3 with fine art, well, I haven't got to the education level of picking my Picassos yet, so I've got that extra 1/3 in gold and silver, but it is there as money and will be spent as money when the right occasion occurs, and that's not too far away.
No, it's there's no need to be old, sick and broke.
No.
It would be the worst possible combination that anybody could experience. We all get older, of course, and your health, you're bound to be healthier if you can finance your way through it. Mm. But old and then broke would be horrible. The combination of the three would be very nasty.
Disastrous.
And yet the cold, hard facts tell us that only 2% of the world's population are wealthy. Mm. It's not all that hard. Peter Daniels taught us years ago, didn't he?
Yeah.
In the early 80s.
Absolutely.
It's not hard to become relatively wealthy. Basic formula.
Just a basic saving scheme, but saving in the right money.
Yeah.
Right? It's got to be the right stuff.
David, Egon von Greyerz, another gentleman that Brian and I hold in very high regard, a comment just recently that he made really interested me. He said, financial institutions would only need to increase their allocation slightly for us to see a gold mania. Could you just expand on that, please?
This has been discussed among our community several times, and no one really has the exact numbers. But if you go back into the 70s, and I've been asked this and couldn't dig it out and prove it by any written statements. But back in the 70s, when Americans were allowed to own gold again. I mean, Americans couldn't own gold from the 1933 law, and I think it was 71 or 72 you could. So anyway, the point is that gold took off from the, edict price. It's actually $42.22, believe it or not. And it went up to about $200 rather quickly. And very few people knew about, you could even own gold or were interested in owning gold or knew why you should own it. But then it went from 200 down to about 100. And we were in this, I wish I never bought gold and all that. It took a while for gold to come back up to 200. But once it got back to 200, it went into that mania phase that we've talked about, and I think Egon is referring to, which means that once it got to 250, 300, it went from 300 to 850 very, very rapidly. Why? Because of buying pressure. Why was there so much buying pressure? Because the government itself was letting everybody know that the consumer price index was about 13%. And you don't have to have a finance degree that if you're losing the purchasing power of your currency at 13% a year, it's going to be worth a lot less real quick. So where do you go? In those days, I think people were better educated, or at least had a better common sense that, silver was in circulation through 1964. You could start you could start having gold in your portfolio in the early 70s. And if you didn't have money as part of your portfolio, you were going to miss out. And that whole idea caught fire, and away we went. And that was a US phenomenon. And then Volcker stepped in and said, look, I'm pushing up interest rates this high. And that basically killed the gold market. And it's been tough on gold up until the year 2000, when we reignited interest in gold for people that know the difference between currency and money. This time, it's a world phenomenon. This time, the amount of currency that's been printed versus the amount of gold that exists is astronomically larger. It's like 2 orders of magnitude. An order of magnitude, folks, is 10 times. So 1 to 10, that's an order of magnitude. 10 to 100, that's 2 orders of magnitude. So we're in a position where no one wants to be the first one to exit in the hierarchy of the elite financial status. What did I just say? All of the money powers know what's happening. I don't think there's one of them that doesn't. But they all want to keep playing the game of musical chairs, pretending there's enough chairs to sit down when this music stops, and there isn't. But no one wants to be the first one to exit, because if they exit and quit playing the game, they might get a gunshot in the back. I'm using that as a metaphor, but it's a pretty tight community, believe it or not. And so they keep pretending that everything could be okay, and they keep pretending that there's a way out, and there isn't. There's no way out. So what happens is someone will exit or try to exit. And maybe that one person, I'm using this as a metaphor, will be injured or wounded, but that sparks 2 that run through the door, and then 10, and then 20, and all of a sudden you can't get through the door. That's a metaphor for what's going to happen. The run to gold, I call it the run to gold, will be above and beyond anything we've ever seen in financial history, as far as I'm concerned. I may be right. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. The reason being is that the liquidity and the trust of gold goes far beyond any cryptocurrency up to this point in time. You can make the arguments for crypto. I won't do it here. You can study that on your own. In fact, I'm doing a crypto conspiracy theory series of videos that I've started on my website. I just digress for a moment, guys. Forgive me, but there's a lot of questions surrounding gold versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not gold in any way, shape, or form. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going to gold. Now, what happens to silver? Well, silver, as Jim Sinclair said, is gold on steroids, because once gold goes into and no one has an exact number, but the general idea is right. Once gold goes into the 2,500, 3,000 range, probably most Americans that have got 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000 ready cash, they don't really want to spend that on 1 or 2 or 3 coins. And they'll look at the silver market and they'll see silver's only $65 an ounce or $105 an ounce or whatever it is. And say, oh, I get a lot more silver. So the run to gold will spill over in the silver market. And again, it's not a US phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. At the same time, in silver, there's an industrial supply demand that doesn't go away. And this is what's so intriguing, is that some, not all, actually, I expect few of the CFOs or the logistics department or supplies for large corps like Apple or Samsung or Toshiba or Mitsubishi or you name it, will start noticing that silver's over $120 an ounce and they only have a 3-month supply. And the last time they bought it was only $42 an ounce. They're going to say, uh-oh, we better buy some silver, which will put even, what I call double pressure on silver. You have investment demand because people can't afford gold. You'll have a run to silver, and then you have this increased demand. So there'll be, in my view, almost a fight over silver for the dual purpose. There'll be people that need an industry that cannot produce a product without it. They're out of business if they don't have it. That's how much it means to them. And then for the populace, they're out of business if they don't have it. Because if they don't have it and the currency's failing, or they want outside the system, or they want to be able to pay for something with money instead of a government force, they're going to strive to get it as well. Remember, when this happens, it's not that everyone wants financial freedom. It's not that everybody wants what you have. If you have, enough money that you can buy vacations and dress better and have a better car and maybe have more luxurious house and all those things that we associate with having some real wealth. No, it's an infinite demand when you think you are going to lose everything you have because the monetary system is failing. Your pension, gone. Your savings, gone. Your health plan, gone. Your kids' college education, gone. Your apartment buildings, gone. Why? Because the currency doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And when that idea sparks, that's why you get the 90% in the last 10% of the time. It's not a monetary phenomenon. It's not, because we've already printed 40% of the currency in the last 18 months in the United States. If that doesn't sound like hyperinflation, I don't know what does. But the gold price is still sitting under 2,000 an ounce. So it's not a function of how much inflation has taken place. It's there for anyone that wants to look it up. But it will happen when it's that psychological event. And that's hard to predict, but it will happen. And once it happens, there's nothing that Mr. Powell, Janet Yellen, Prime Minister, Trudeau, anyone can do about it. And that really is something the bankers fear.
Yeah. So, which sort of almost covers my last question. And because I was going to suggest to David that quite clearly we've never seen money printing like we are at the moment. I mean, just to bring to a head. Okay, global debt, Brian, David, has gone from 100, this is amazing, it's gone from 100 trillion to 300 trillion in the blink of an eyelid. I mean, it took 2,000 years to get to 100 trillion, and it's taken 20 years to go from 100 trillion to 300 trillion. So, I mean, certain currencies are really noticing this right now, so far as a hyperinflationary trend. Currently, we have the Turkish lira crashing. We've got Brazilian, Argentinian currencies breaking up. Yeah. I guess the question, my last question for you, David, is do you expect to see hyperinflation? Based on what you've been discussing today, the answer to that would be yes. But do you expect to see it on a global scale?
No, I don't. I do expect to see a lot of distortions in the market, and I do expect to see people shunning the ability of the dollar to work. But I don't see it in a hyperinflation, and that's a tough call because, you have to define hyperinflation. And, if it's over 20% a year, yeah, we'll probably have that in US dollar terms. The reason I say no, and I'm pretty emphatic about it, is because the way this whole system is structured. And the whole system is structured on what's called credit. And the other side of the coin for credit is debt. And we always talk about debt, almost every show. We know it's astronomical. We know it can't be paid back. So what happens? The way you pay it back in Zimbabwe or what happened in the Weimar Republic is you just basically print it.
Yeah.
Those were closed circuits. Right now, it is and has been for a long time, since Bretton Woods, 1944, that the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and it's based on the debt market being the United States government debt is the most sacrosanct. It's considered to be the stalwart. It's considered really metaphorically to be better than gold. I mean, if you look at the way the financial system is set up, the idea is that you cannot lose buying United States debt. And of course, I know better, and you know better. A lot of people know better. As the late, great Franz Pick used to say, that bonds are certificates of confiscation or guaranteed certificates of confiscation. And that's what they are, because when you buy a long bond or whatever, 30 years from now, and you pay $10,000 for that bond and you get $10,000 back 30 years from now, I think anyone that's ever watched one of your shows knows that $10,000 is not going to purchase anything close to what it did 30 years earlier. But the game goes on, as I said earlier, pretend and extend. So here's my point. So let me get to it. The bond market will crash. Now, whether the whole entire US debt system goes to zero, I don't think it will. But it will be mitigated as best it can be by the financial authorities. But when debt goes to zero, meaning the US can't pay back the 5-year note or the 10-year or the 30 or whatever, and they step in and say, well, we're changing it to a 100-year bond, we'll start paying you back 100 years from now, or we're going to freeze interest on it, or whatever they come up with, you're going to see a huge contraction. Now, when you have a contraction in the reserve currency backed by debt or credit, that's highly deflationary. Think of all the insurance companies that are out there that have bonds in their portfolio, and all of a sudden that bond portfolio is cut in half. How can they pay off, the people that require to be paid back on their insurance policies? So that's ubiquitous. I mean, it goes through all your money markets, your hedge funds, your portfolio managers, your pension funds, your 401ks, your Roth IRAs, your RSPs, everything that you can think of in the financial sector is tied to the bond market one way, shape, or form. And this, of course, means interest rates. So in an advanced capital structure like we have globally, if you're tied to something that's not worth anything, and that's the bond market, in reality, it's not worth anything. It's just printed up phony baloney, but we all trust it as being the thing we should trust the most. I mean, that shows you how insane the humanity of the human species is. The one thing you can create out of thin air that has absolutely no value from the beginning to the end is something we're supposed to put our whole trust in. Does that make any sense? Absolutely not. But my point is, no, I don't expect hyperinflation, because a lot of these corporate bonds will be worth nothing, absolutely nothing. They have borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and built these big buildings, and they produced a bunch of widgets, and they've been real popular for a while. And which color one are you going to get? And yet they can't pay back their debt. Boop. Yep. And it's worth zero. And then the next corporation that built a widget squared with whatever, and it's worth zero. So you're going to see a huge contraction in the debt markets, which means money goes away. So you're going to have less of that fiat flying around. On the other hand, prices are going to go up and up and up. And that's part of it. And I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth, trying to give a very accurate picture, because most people do not address this question accurately, in my view. They just say, oh, it's going to be hyperinflation. No, it's going to cost up the kazoo to eat, to run around in your car, your automobile, or in an airplane, and then stuff that's overproduced that really doesn't have much value, like what the greatest, latest, and wonderful fashion is. Those things will be marked down heavily. So you're going to see a huge distortion throughout all the markets, but things you really need will cost a lot more. And you could look at those as a subset and saying that some of those instances, there'll be hyperinflation, but overall, there'll be a countervailing, pervasive destruction of credit or debt. We could call it debt throughout the corporate debt world and the government debt world. And that run to gold I talked about earlier will happen just before the destruction, or as the destruction of the US debt markets. As I said earlier, and I think it bears repeating, everyone's putting their trust in something they could create for nothing. It's supposed to be the most secure thing that exists, and yet it comes from nowhere. It means nothing. Yet everybody's sitting there putting all their faith in the good faith and credit of the United States. Well, we're broke. Been broke. There's no use lying about it anymore. If you don't understand what I've just said over the course of the last few minutes, please find the cat channel and watch a cat doing push-ups, because you don't belong here.
Very very interesting take. And you just want to own gold, right?
You absolutely do. You can't afford to be without it.
Oh dear.
Yeah. David, unless Darryl, you've got another question there. I think I've got one more question. Then we'll complete the show. But what you just said there about debt, and we have a saying here that there's only one way to go broke, and that is to have too much debt.
Yep.
That's it.
Exactly.
I want to finish off here, David, on central bank digital currency, CBDC. Stephen Lieb, who just recently wrote a book, China, Rise and the New Age of Gold. He mentions about digital currencies, but just recently, Stephen Lieb writes for Eric King regularly that he has a sound knowledge of China's recent history and believes that China will back its digital currency with gold, with their, in his opinion, 25,000 to 30,000 tonne of gold that they've accumulated in the last 15, 20 years. If China does this, will the US have to follow? And do you believe central bank digital currencies have a future? David?
Yeah, I wrote about it in the Morgan Report several months ago. I think it was around April of this year. And Mark Carney, who was president of the London Bank at that time, he no longer is, gave the same speech at the United Nations, gave it at Davos, the World Economic Forum is better known as now, and also at Jackson, Wyoming, where the Fed meets in private. And the speech was the same. He said that we want a central bank digital currency backed by absolutely nothing. So he said they want it not backed by gold. And they want it modern money theory, meaning they can print it to kingdom come. No cash, cashless society, and they'll make it ubiquitous. It'll be for everybody, everywhere, at all times. That's what they want. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to take place. So my answer is that there's no doubt in my mind that the money elite want to continue their power and control of the monetary system. They want to move it into a central bank digital currency. They may have it in different nation states initially, and then combine it into one global unit, one central bank of the world, so to speak. And how that's implemented, again, we don't know exactly. What they will do most likely, and you can see the trends already established, is they'll be really good to us. You'll own nothing and you'll like it, because what they'll do is they'll say, well, we've got a debt problem. We can't pay back this debt. Oh, you mean a banker's actually speaking the truth to the public for a change? But we got a really great plan. All you students that have student debt, forgiven. All you people with mortgage debt you can't pay, forgiven. We're going to do this. We are your, and of course, these are my words. They won't say this, but this is what the implication is. We're your best friend, big brother. And what we're going to do is we're going to take away all those problems. You have no debt. And on top of that, we are going to give you a universal basic income. So you don't even have to worry about having a job. No. All you have to do is go down to your local post office, get your photograph taken, and give them a little piece of blood sample. And once we have your DNA, you will be in the new system. And the new system will guarantee that you will live a wonderful life. You will have this box, 12 by 12, with a big screen and 2 couches, and you will have a food allowance of this, and you'll be allowed this much credit on public transportation and yada, yada, yada. So that sci-fi world is what they have planned. And whether or not that happens or not, I don't know. Now, as far as gold backed, I haven't forgotten your question, it could be superseded by China. If China does do a central bank digital currency that is backed by gold, then everyone that sees what's happening and understands it will want China to be the reserve currency of the world. They will want a gold-backed currency. So would that force the U.S. to do something similar? The answer is yes, it would. Would they be able to? Maybe. I don't know if they even got the gold they purportedly have in Fort Knox. But I'm not so sure they would. But it's tough. I've studied this for a long time. In fact, I was one of the first to come and talk about a gold-backed yuan. There was a gentleman that used to write a newsletter out of the wilderness, I think. And he did a great job, and he brought it to my attention, and I gave him credit and talked about it. So it's been batted back and forth for at least 20, if not 30 years. And I do think that it may be necessary. So let me back up a little bit. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I want to be thorough. If the trial balloon goes for, let's say, I don't know, let's say the UK, because they really don't use the euro. They use the British pound. And they go to central bank digital currency based on the pound. And they get all this backlash. No one wants to sign up. No one goes to the post office. They're still trading the notes and, whatever. That little trial balloon will tell them, it's not going to work. We're going to have to entice these fools. We'll put gold behind it. So I do think that the bankers are thinking of plan A, B, and C. As Mark Carney indicated, they want nothing behind it. And you do as we say. We've got force. We're going to force you into this, but we're going to pretend like you have a choice. If that doesn't work, I think plan B would be to implement gold in some way, shape, or form. The problem with having gold backing is they could just say it, because they're not going to let you liquidate in the gold. There's no way they're going to let that happen. They'll just, maybe nation state to nation state, they might say, okay, we'll ship the gold for these goods or something like that. But as far as an individual saying, hey, I've got 150 million yuan, I want my ounce of gold, give it to me. No, that's not going to happen. So I think I covered that fairly well. Did that spark any more questions?
Thank you, David. You did cover it extremely well. I was just thinking while you were talking, David, that not many overseas people know this, but Australia does have a grand total of, or the central bank, I should say, the Reserve Bank of Australia, has 80 tonne of gold. But it's not in Australia. It's in Great Britain. It's Bank of England. I think we better get it over back here very quickly. But anyway, that's thank you for that answer, David. Very well said.
David, look, time's up again.
Time is up.
How quickly time flies. David, thank you so much for your input again today. It's always so very much appreciated. I'd like to finish by referring to Charlie Jones. I do this on quite a regular basis. I was fortunate enough, as you were, Brian, to meet Charlie. In fact, stood on stage with Charlie on one occasion as a speaker, which was great. But Charlie always used to talk about, the people we meet in the books you read. He'd say, in 10 years' time, you'll be in exactly the same position you're in right now, apart from two things, people you meet and the books you read. There's an opportunity, and I'll say, if you can just remember or look back, Brian, how important was it for us to meet Peter Daniels at the time that we did? I mean, he turned our life around, didn't he?
That's
really?
exactly right.
And our relationship with David, of course, is just ever so powerful. And, I think to myself, we've got a lot of people viewing this interview today. Every single one of them has an opportunity to connect with David if they so desire, via the Morgan Report. What a wonderful opportunity. I mean, to connect with somebody like David, a person of his influence, his input, what an asset that would be, and it's there and it's waiting. So what I'd like to, if you could, David, if you could just explain to our audience what's required in connecting with you via the Morgan Report, and what might they expect to be able to receive once they're connected with you?
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the compliment. I sincerely take it to heart. The one thing is I do a lot for free. So just go to themorganreport.com and sign up for a free newsletter. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this often enough, but I'm not sure how much longer I'll be up on YouTube. I'm still there, and I think I have a reason why I won't state it publicly. But I am on Odyssey. So if anything happens, everything I've done for the last 20 plus years is on another platform that's, at least at this time, free market. So there's that. To connect with me, I used to have a consultation tab. So if you were a paid member, it cost half my normal fee, which was $500 US per hour. But I've taken it down. I just do not have that amount of time available to be able to consult with people like I used to. So the only real direct access you have is through the paid version of the Morgan Report. There's a subscribe tab. You can pull it down. We have two services, the premium and the mastermind. I do take questions from my paid subscribers, and there's a limit to them. And I usually do them in one of two ways. I do them individually, where me or one of my staff will answer you directly by email. And often the questions are so good or so pertinent to the news flow of the day that I will personally, and sometimes with one of the staff members, do a Zoom call and go through, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions in a video format. And these often have to do with all kinds of things, but long-term prices, what's happening with a jurisdiction like Peru that just closed down 4 mines. What do you think about a gold-backed currency? I mean, a lot of different questions. So I do, on an as-required basis, a video update between the written newsletter. And the written newsletter is in electronic form. It's long. I'd like to make it like a lot of the industry, only 8 pages. And I wouldn't say fluffy. I don't write in a fluffy way, but when you do some of these mining companies analysis, I mean, some of these companies, like, for example, when Agnico Eagle took over Kirkland Lake, that report alone was probably 12 pages because there's so many mines and all that. So it's primarily geared for people that have already obtained physical metal. I almost have wanted to make it a requirement. You had to take a little quiz before you could enter the website. I own precious metals, yes. And once they check the yes box, then they're allowed to subscribe to the Morgan Report, because I focus mostly on the equity side, top tier, mid tier, and speculative companies that are in the resource sector, not just silver and gold, lithium, cobalt, uranium, some asymmetric trades, one that's one of my favorites. That's a highly speculative company that can or will change the mining industry. So thank you for letting me spout off about what I do for a living. But if you aren't a stock investor, you don't have a brokerage account, you haven't been in the stock market for, I'd say, 5 years minimum, this is not a beginner report. This is not for you. What it is for is people that have a solid base in physical metal. They want to learn how to leverage their fiat to the resource sector for what's coming down the pike in safe jurisdictions and get the potentially greater return on their fiat than they would in just the precious metals themselves. And having said that, there are times when the metal itself does better than the mining equities. I think once we get into this inflation to hyperinflation mode that we just discussed, that's when the run to gold starts. And when the run to gold starts, it goes like this. Everyone starts to see gold. Oh my, and they get the my. My, have you seen the price of gold go up lately? A weekly, my, have you seen the price of gold? It's up even more. And then when the my start to hit the public, they go, my, what I need to do is buy gold. But they won't. They won't come to you, Darryl and Brian. There will be people, but not the people I'm referring to. People I'm referring to are the people that will go into the penny stock market. And they will look for the cheapest gold stock that they could possibly find because they think they've missed the train. The train's left the station, but they want to run behind it and grab on. So they'll find a gold stock that's only 12 cents that has about as much gold as my cat does. And they'll go in there and they'll buy that because it's called Gold Explosion. And they'll buy Gold Explosion for 12 cents. And you know what will happen? Because a lot of other people, a lot of other fools will buy Gold Explosion because it's got a great name and a great symbol. Get Gold, G-E, who knows? You get my idea. And it will explode. It'll go from 12 cents to $1.20 or maybe $12 in a real panic. It's not worth that. But that's what will happen. Anything with gold or silver in its name, options, limited partnership, of gold-backed bonds. You got to be very careful when this thing starts to explode. Very careful. In fact, what needs to be done is for somebody or some buddies to warn the public, which I'm doing now. And if you're going to play that game, you darn well better know what you're doing. And a lot of times what you want to do is take the safety of metal. So if you're really a sophisticated investor, you follow the Morgan report. Some of our stalwarts have gone from $30 to $300 as an example. Take some of that off the table. You've got a 10 bagger and gold's only gone up fourfold. So you've done better than gold at that time. Call Darryl and Brian up and say, hey, I want to take this paper. I want to turn it into real gold. Do that.
Yeah.
And I've done that. I've done it almost all the way up, by the way. I mean, a lot of these companies that I've had investments in that have not done well, what do I do with it? Cash out and buy money. Why would I keep it in fiat, right? We already talked about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Charlie Jones was talking about people like David. And, you know, there's the opportunity. The Morgan report. I mean, connect with David and it'll make a difference to your life, for sure.
People you read, the books you read, people you meet, the books you read. Yep.
Correct. We've always adhered to that policy, haven't we, Brian?
Absolutely.
Jim Sinclair, in closing, Jim Sinclair, of course, makes reference to owning gold, as does a central bank. If it's good enough for them, then it should be good enough for us. Egon von Greyer's, Brian, your favourite. What does Egon say?
Whatever you can't afford to lose, you can't afford to lose, that's how much you put into gold and silver.
Yep. And Peter Daniels, of course, I do not care what poorly executed economic decisions are made in the world tonight, because tomorrow I'll still be able to party. And why would that be? Because he owns gold. He owns something of value. So thank you once again, David. Really appreciate your input as always. And to our viewers and subscribers, thank you so much for continuing to support this channel. And I guess for now, can only suggest stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.